Tonight's class, the Kiddush Food for Thought for this week, is sponsored by, and we thank Yuri Shleansky and Devorah Topper, who sponsored the shir in honor of Yuri's father, Leib ben Meir Isaac, and Devorah's grandmother, Sarah Bas Mordechai. Their neshamas should go to the highest points in Gan Eden, should have an aliyah throughout communal learning. And this week's shir is also sponsored by Eva Shore in memory of her mother, Clara Fishman Yentl Bas Naftali. Is her 10th yahrzeit this past week, and we also wish her neshama should have ascend to the highest points in Gan Eden and have an aliyah. I'm going to share my screen over here. Tonight we are going to embark on, as we've done in the past, some of the great debates, great decisions, and great deciders surrounding this coronavirus era. We've been separated from this platform for a couple of weeks, so just to reorient ourselves with this series we've been doing. I mean, the Torah that has been developed over the last, and it's a scary thing to say, the last 23 weeks since we in the United States have been dealing with this coronavirus. And we shut down our shul on March 13th, and New York was maybe 2 or 3 days before then. It was, so since then we've had so many shilas. I mean, I have a folder like this big with all of the questions that were posed to chief rabbis of Israel, but probably most notably were Rav Asher Weiss and my Rebbe, Rav Hershel Shechter Shlita, whom have responded to the toughest questions in real time. And I think I've shared the story in the past that his son, my friend Rav Shai Shechter, asked his father, Abba, where did you have time to come up with all these clear, concise, thought out answers? You get so many of these questions a day. When do you have the time to actually prepare these answers? So he said, well, I've been preparing for the last 80 years, right? And with these kinds of shoulders, like Rav Asher Weiss and Rav Shechter, they're getting these questions that are these just unbelievable questions of great magnitude, and are poskening, answering questions for all of Klal Yisrael, us here in La Jolla included. I speak to Rav Shechter quite often to get his guidance, and it's amazing when you get guidance from the top. It's the closest thing we have today to Har Sinai is Rav Shechter. So tonight, as we are approaching Rosh Hashanah, and in honor of the fact that the shul just sent out communication about, at least just the basic rough blueprint of what Rosh Hashanah is going to look like, and we asked everyone to provide some feedback on that, and if you can pass it around, please do. The survey and the letter about what Rosh Hashanah roughly is going to look like, but we're still working out the details. So in honor of the fact that we're preparing for the high holidays, we want to make this as meaningful as possible. There are two basic issues that every shul pretty much, all over the United States and in Israel, if not the entire world, are dealing with for the upcoming Yom Noraim season. Those two things are, which really stem from one issue, and that's the issue of social distancing. Social distancing, while it is, a important thing to do from a medical perspective, it's something that we all try and adhere to. But it also has its downsides, the obvious ones being the fact that even though it may be socially distant from one another, and that creates physical distance, but it also creates a emotional distance between one another when we keep that kind of space. So there's that aspect to it. There's that negative aspect. But
Rabbi, quick question, Rabbi. Does psoriasis incorporating any of the laws of psoriasis of being, when you speak Lashon Hara, does that any of that incorporate into the discussion?
Of what exactly, Mike?
Social distancing and the emotional and the physical trauma of that.
Right. That happens to be, it's a, tsaras is the only place in the Torah where a person is obligated to leave the camp and to go into a mandated quarantine. That is a fascinating discussion with regard to the laws of Biker Cholim to someone who is afflicted with COVID, which maybe we'll do next week. That would be a good topic. We haven't done that yet in the coronavirus series. This is our 7th one, by the way. But social distancing creates, issues with regard to the way that we function at shul. You look at the way that the parking lot is set up. It's a bracha that we have it, but with this outdoor minyan under these conditions. But at the end of the day, people are sitting so distant from one another. We can't give each other big hugs on a Friday night, handshakes. It's a difficult thing, and it's definitely out of the ordinary. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur makes that issue of the fact that we have to be separated and have distance from one another, it magnifies the issue tremendously, because now we don't only have to fit the regular people that come once a week or even once a month. Now we have to be able to fit in a socially distant manner, Emir Tashem, hopefully 700-800 people into the shul. And how are we going to do that, especially given the fact that we are in California, and in California there's still a mandate, we're not allowed to go inside. Hopefully that's going to change by the time we get to Yom Noraim, so we can have one more space. But we have a space issue. How are we going to deal with this space issue, being that we have to be socially distant? That was question number 1 that was posed to Rav Shechter and all the Gedolim during this period. The second is that, the basic answer to how are we going to deal with the space issue is, okay, well, let's create smaller pods or smaller groups, right? So if let's take an easy number, 800 people. So, and we have a space that could fit 400 people. So what you do is you have, 2 separate times for davening, one for the first group of 400, one for the second group of 400. If you have 400 people, one set for the set of 200 and one for the other set of 200. And that way you'll be able to give yourself a little bit more space. And then you'll be able to fit everyone and accommodate everyone to come for the Yom Noraim. That poses an issue, though, because most shuls, not just ours, the davening on Rosh Hashanah is quite extensive. And if it's quite extensive and it takes many, many hours of the day, how are we going to be able to accommodate both? So these are the questions that were posed to Rav Shechter, my Rabbi in particular, and many other Gedolim all over the world. So I'd like tonight to dive into the response that Rav Shechter gave to these questions and these very important questions, and just to get us thinking about, how, again, in real time, we are going to experience this year a Rosh Hashanah that is going to be living out some very unique Torah thoughts, very unique halachic ideas. And in that of itself should serve as a schus for us, should serve as a merit for us, that we're really living the Torah. So it begins with a Gemara in Maseches Nedarim on Daf Pei Aleph, which the Gemara says, it talks about the halacha of minhagim. Now, much of what we do in Judaism, as the Rambam points out, that you could really summarize all of halacha, all of Jewish law, into 5 categories. Really 6 categories. There is the written Torah. But then even to understand the written Torah, you need to have the oral Torah, which can be separated into 5 categories. There is the basic way to understand the written Torah, and there are certain psukim that they only have one way of understanding them, according to our tradition to understand them in our oral law. That's number 1, the Perushim Mikubalim, the accepted understanding of the Torah. Number 2 are halacha l'Moshe Messinai, meaning things that were never even written in the Torah. For example, the fact that tefillin need to be black. That is something that you'll never find any hint to in the Torah. It was never written in the Torah, but we have a tradition from Har Sinai. Part of our old tradition is the fact that tefillin have to be black. And number 3, says the Rambam, are drushos, that when the rabbis will expound upon a pasuk, they'll elaborate, they'll elucidate the psukim in the Torah in a way that uses the principles, the guiding principles that Moshe taught us at Har Sinai. And by doing so, you learn more halachas, basically what's between the lines. That is the third drushos, the third piece of our oral law. And number 4 are rabbinic enactments. The rabbis decide that one is not allowed to carry from one home to another home unless there is a eruv chatzeros, there is a way to bind all of the homes in the community through a box of matzahs, through a meal. That is a rabbinic enactment. That is the 4th type of our oral tradition, the 4th piece to our oral tradition. The 5th are minhagim, the customs that we have, which is a lot of what we do in Judaism. Shalom Aleichem, a custom. Kabbalah Shabbos, a custom. The fact that we bench our children on Friday night, a custom. So many things that we do in Yiddishkeit are customs. So what is the halachic status of a custom? So says the Gemara the following: Devarim hamutarim, things that are completely permissible. V'acherim nagu bahem iser. However, people are stringent in that matter. They treat it as a prohibition. I'll give you an example. An example would be not eating meat during the 9 days. Not eating meat during the 9 days between Rosh Chodesh Av and Tisha B'Av is a custom. It's a minhag. So it is completely, from a halachic perspective, mutter. However, we have taken upon ourselves this custom of prohibition to not eat meat during those 9 days. Says the Gemara, I ata rashai linhog bahem heter. One would not be allowed to one day, just, let's say 3 days into the 9 days, someone saying, forget this, I want to have myself a good geschmacka piece of steak, so I'm going to throw a steak on the grill, I'm going to eat it. I don't care that for the last 20 years of my life, the last 40 years of my life, the last 60 years of my life, I have been following this custom to not eat meat during the 9 days. I don't care, I'm having the steak anyway. Says the Gemara, that is a prohibition. That is a rabbinic prohibition. I ata rashai linhog b'hem heter. You are not allowed to do such a thing, because the Torah says, lo yachel dvaro. You're not allowed to violate your word. Your word is extended to even the things that you do. You commit yourself to a certain practice. So be a man of your word. Stick to what you say. Stick to what you do. You have to have a certain consistency. And therefore, you're not allowed to just eat the meat during the 9 days just because you feel like it. Once you have accepted upon yourself a certain custom, you have to stick that way. So this poses a question for us on Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because the easy solution to shortening our services would be remove all the extra customs. Easy solution. So much of our davening on Rosh Hashanah are customs. We know that there's an obligation to say Shema and the blessings of the Shema. That is a halacha. That's an obligation we have to do. That's a Torah obligation we have to do. We know that we have to say the Shmona Esrei. Nothing we can do about the Shmona Esrei. Shema, Shmona Esrei, Musaf, Shofar, these things have to stay. No question about it. The blessings we make have to stay. No question about it. Those are rabbinic institutions or even Torah institutions like Shofar or like the Shema. Nothing we can do about it. However, most of the things we do on Rosh Hashanah are customs. All of Psukei de Zimra, all of the beautiful paragraphs of praises of God that we say every single day of the year, and on Shabbos, and on Rosh Hashanah, and every single day, that's a custom. Psukei de Zimra is a custom. And all of the piyutim, all of the liturgical poems that we recite, like, for example, Nasana Tokef. Uberosh Hashanah yikasevun. This is a custom. We think of it as like, oh, how could you have a Rosh Hashanah without it, right? It's a custom. Well, a custom does have a halachic imperative to it. So the question is posed, well, hold on one second. If we want to be able to shorten the services, the first thing that should go then are these customs. But how are we going to be able to if it's a minhag, and being that it's a minhag, therefore it has real halachic stature to it. So this is brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that a minhag, it has the status of a real din, a real halacha that one needs to follow. Says the Shulchan Aruch the following: Dvarim hamutarim, says the Shulchan Aruch, that which is mutter, it is technically permissible. V'hayodim bahem shehem mutarim, nagu bahem iser. But those that know that is perfectly permissible, still they treat it as iser. Like, for example, someone who doesn't eat meat during the 9 days or something like that. Says the Shulchan Aruch, it's ki'ilu kiblo alem beneder. It's like you've accepted upon yourself like an oath. The aser lahatiram, you are not allowed to just get rid of it. You would have to continue to follow the minhag. So what are we going to do this year? We want to be able to shorten the services, to take out the quote-unquote extra, just customary things we do. But hold on, customs are very serious. It's quoted in Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the greatest posek that ever lived, the halachic revolutionary, 1488 to 1575, from Tzfat, was the undisputed Gadol Ador, is telling us, quoting straight from the Gemara, that we have to treat this with the utmost seriousness. So what are we going to do if we want to be able to shorten the services? By taking out the customs. So Rav Shechter pointed to the Noda B'Yehuda. The Noda B'Yehuda, who has a small comments on the side of the Shulchan Aruch over here. So the Noda B'Yehuda, who is known by the name of his sefer, his name was Rabbi Cheskel Landau. His mother didn't call him Noda B'Yehudala. His mother called him Cheski. Rabbi Cheskel Landau. Rabbi Cheskel Landau was the chief rabbi of Prague. He lived 1713 to 1793. At the age of 40, he became the Rav of one of the most prominent Jewish cities. He wrote a number of Sfarim. Probably the three most famous of the Sfarim that he wrote are the one that he is known by, the Noda B'Yehuda. It became his nickname, which are his responsa. He wrote a sefer called Tziyun L'Nefesh Chaya, the Tzlach, and the Dagel Mervava. The first two Sfarim that he wrote, the Noda B'Yehuda, his responsa, and his commentaries on Shas, the Tzlach, the Tziyun L'Nefesh Chaya, are named actually for his parents. He wrote both of the Sfarim in memory of his parents. The Noda B'Yehuda, his father was Yehuda, and Tziyun L'Nefesh Chaya, his mother was Chaya. And he wrote both of the Sfarim. It's an amazing display of Kibbud Av V'Em, a great way to honor your parents and their legacy. So he was unbelievable posek. He was really like one of the Gedolei Ador, if not the Gadol Ador at the time, along with the Chassam Sofer and Rabbi Kiva Eger. So he has these small comments on the side of Shulchan Aruch, and the Dagel Mervava deals with the following question. It's also dealt with in the Shach. The Dagel Mervava, or the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau, deals with, so let's go back to our example of the 9 days with meat, okay? So a person has a custom that they've had for their entire life that they don't eat meat during the 9 days. Okay, it's a pretty prevalent custom amongst Jewish people. Every Jewish community, even the Sephardic Jewish community, except for those that strictly follow the Rambam, no one eats meat during the 9 days. So the question comes up, the Noda B'Yehuda deals with is, let's say there's a bris milah that happens in the middle of the 9 days. And you want to be able to have a Su'udas mitzvah. You want to be able to have a real beautiful meal to celebrate this amazing mitzvah of the bris milah. Like one would normally have a beautiful meal on the day of a bris milah. So is one allowed to have fleishiks, which is a more honorable way to have a Su'udas mitzvah? It's a funny thing that, over time, I don't know if it's an American thing, but over time, the Su'udas mitzvah of a bris milah has become bagels with lox and tuna fish and egg salad, right? With an omelet station, if you're really, if it's a really fancy bris, or a Felicia's Catering, you're going to make sure there's also a pancake and waffle station. But it's become this like breakfast buffet, brunch buffet type of a thing. Rav Shechter happens to be, as everything in life, always with a hiddur, always trying to do it in the best way possible. His kids, whenever he celebrated a bris milah, he always made sure that there was fleishiks, because it's the Sudas mitzvah. It's a beautiful Sudas mitzvah. I was vetoed on that one, to have a fleishik meal at 8 o'clock in the morning. But that it's a Sudas mitzvah. You have to be able to treat it most honorably, and therefore you have it with meat. So hold on, what if about a bris milah that falls out during the 9 days? We have a custom not to eat meat, but now there's a Sudas mitzvah. So says the Dagul Mervava the following. Take a look. If you could see it, it's a very small print. Let me try and make it a little bit bigger over here. The Dagul Mervava says, L'nias daiti nira. Says the Dagul Mervava, it seems to me the following: the gabe bris milah eno choser bo miminhago legamre. Says the Nod B'Yehuda, the person who eats the fleishik meal to celebrate the bris milah, they are not completely rejecting their minhag. They're not getting rid of it. Now it's a bris milah that happens to fall during the 9 days. You want to be able to treat it with respect, with honor, to celebrate the mitzvah. You're not rejecting the fact that you're getting rid of your minhag to not eat meat during the 9 days. You're celebrating a bris milah. Just because there's a situation that arises that forces your hand in your minhag doesn't mean you're completely rejecting the minhag. Because what's going to happen the next year if there's no bris milah? You're going to go back to not eating meat. And the next day after the bris milah, you're not going to eat meat. You're going to eat dairy. It's the 9 days. The Dagul Mervava teaches us a critical lesson over here of how we treat minhagim. He says, "V'hu adin im iralo eze mechush v'ratz lechol hayom u'la'asid shuf chozer leminhago gam ken eretz chatara." Says the Rabbi Yehuda, it's not a rejection of your minhag. If there's a scenario that forces your hand once in a blue moon to break the minhag, that's part of the minhag. That under normal circumstances, I'm noheg like this. I follow this custom under normal circumstances. So the same would be true for Rosh Hashanah this year and Yom Kippur. That it's going to be abridged just because it's just a unique scenario. Our hand is being forced. We obviously can't get rid of the critical things. We can't get rid of the things that our rabbis imposed upon us, like the brachos. We can't get rid of the things that the Torah imposes upon us, obviously, like Shema. We can't get rid of Shemona Esrei. We can't get rid of the shofar. Obviously, those we can't get rid of the leaning. These are things that are obvious we can't get rid of. However, this year our hand is being forced. We're not breaking the minhag by skipping over the piyutim this year, the liturgical poems this year, or by starting with nishmas at shul, starting with with shachars instead of the psukei de zimra, the introductory songs like we have, like Ashrei and Haluka. And, we're not breaking the minhag. Our hand is being forced, and therefore, and God willing, next year we'll come back to observing those minhagim. So that's where Shechter Paskin. There's definitely no issue with skipping over the piyutim this year. I mentioned that being that there's a time constraint, it's very possible that we'll end up starting with nishmas. Probably likely we'll end up starting with nishmas. Now, what I mean is that we're going to start with shachars. Basically, we're going to be starting with right before Birchas Kriyas Shema. So right before Birchas Kriyas Shema on Shabbos and Yantiv, there is there's a beautiful Birchas Hashir. There's a beautiful blessing of praise. It's called Nishmas. It is one of the most beautiful tefillas. It's unbelievable. If you ever want to just have a moment to understand the beauty of Chazal's language in the way that Chazal chose to praise God, I would make a recommendation. My recommendation would be to go to one of your favorite spots, a spot where you can sense some tranquility, where you could experience God. Go to that spot in a quiet way. with an interlinear sitter and read through the words of Nishmas. It is an unbelievable tefillah. It's a beautiful song in praise of God. The Chavetz Chaim had a minhag of saying Nishmas every single night. Rabbi Chaskel Abramsky was once at a rabbinic conference, and at the rabbinic conference was also the Chavetz Chaim. So the first morning of the conference, he gets there. Rabbi Chaskel Abramsky, who was the chief rabbi in England, he gets there. He checks in. He goes to sleep for the night. The whole night he can't sleep. He's hearing this noise coming from the next room. So the next morning he's at the conference. He's half asleep, and he sees the Chavetz Chaim. So the Chavetz Chaim says to him, he says, Rabbi Chaskel, you seem a little tired. Why are you so tired? He said, well, I was up all night. The person next to me was very loud, and it was hard for me to fall asleep. They were singing something. I couldn't exactly make it out exactly what it was. So the Chavetz Chaim looks at him. And he says, oh, I'm so sorry. I'll make sure that tonight I keep it down. I was singing Nishmas. Rabbi Chaskel Abramsky said, no, please. Just continue, and tonight I'll make sure to pay attention. It's such a beautiful song. So when it comes to Shabbos and Yantiv, you should always know that if, let's say, a person is lagging behind in the Psukei de Zimra and they're afraid that they're not going to make it to Daven Shmona Esrei with the congregation, so you could skip over certain parts of Psukei de Zimra, but you can never skip over Nishmas on Shabbos and Yantiv. You have to say Nishmas, which is why likelihood is that we're going to be starting from Nishmas. That's exactly what's brought down. We're not going to go through it inside right now. That's what's brought down by the Chai Adam, Rabbi Avram Danzig, who quotes from his Mechutin, the Gra. By the way, Rabbi Avram Danzig was one of the closest students of the Noda B'Yehuda. Okay, so now we figured out how to make the davening a little bit shorter. We could skip over the piyutim. We could start with nishmas. So we've taken care of the fact that davening is a bit shorter, and that will hopefully be able to allow more than one minyan back to back, and more mispalim will be able to join in the parking lot minyan. But now we get to another issue, which is, this year, another complication that has risen is that normally we have beautiful chazanos, beautiful choir with amazing way to uplift our tefillah, with ohad, Ophir in the choir. It's usually it's an absolutely beautiful experience of a way to daven. This year, unfortunately, it's not an option. We don't have a way of bringing them in. And even if we did it, we wouldn't practically, if we have to have multiple minyanim, and how would they be able to manage? It's just practically, it's not happening. But we still have to get good chazanim. We know that the halacha is that the chazan for the high holidays needs to be someone who's a yoreh shamayim, so someone who really knows the fact that they are standing before the melech, they're standing before the king on the day of his coronation. And it's the Yom Hadin, it's the day of judgment. It is a serious moment, and you are the one that's standing there on behalf of the congregation. You need to be able to charge everyone, to uplift everyone, to be able to motivate everyone for teshuvah and for closeness to God and for rejuvenation. It's your responsibility, and therefore, who we choose as a chazan that's able to accomplish that in a meaningful way is a very difficult task to do. And unfortunately, it's not that we have a huge pool of people that fit that bill. All over the country, a chazan that fits that bill is harder to come by. And being that there are so many additional services happening this year, so how many chazanim can we have? It's how is it possible we'll be able to get so many chazanim, people that know how to do a good shachars, a good musaf, but there's going to be 2 shachars, there's going to be 2 musafs. How are we going to be able to accommodate all of that? So Rav Shechter said, well, why don't you have the same chazan do multiple services? So hold on one second. Once the chazan did one of the services, so let's say he already davened shacharis. So if he already davened shacharis, then that means he already did his davening. So if he already did his davening, how is he going to be able to also be the chazan in the next minyan? He already davened. He already did musaf. He already did a chazaras hashatz of musaf. How is he going to be able to be a chazan in the next minyan? Basically, to have a multi-purpose chazan, where the chazan is going to be a chazan in one minyan and then in another minyan. Is that something that we can do? So, as always, it all goes back to the original sources. The Gemara in the end of Maseches Rosh Hashanah says the following: Tani Ava Bre de Rabbi Zera. Ava, the son of Rabbi Zera, said the following: Kol habrachos kulan, all blessings, all of them. Afal pi sheyatza, even if one already fulfilled their obligation, they've already made that blessing, they fulfilled their obligation. Even though they've done that already, motzi, they could fulfill other people's obligation. So, for example, I already made kiddush for myself. I fulfilled my obligation of kiddush. I can recite kiddush on behalf of someone else. Now, again, I could do it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. Even though I fulfilled my obligation, I can help someone else fulfill their obligation. Rashi tells us a beautiful reason why that's so. Says Rashi the following. Rashi says, Afal pi shiyatza motzi, even though you fulfill your obligation already, you can fulfill someone else's obligation. Shehare, because kol Yisrael arevim zeh bezeh. Limitzvos, because the entire Jewish people are arevim. They are, arev in halacha is a guarantor. We are guarantors for one another in the fulfillment of mitzvos. That the way many poskim say it is that just because I fulfilled my mitzvah, it is incomplete. It is an incomplete fulfillment of the mitzvah until you fulfill your mitzvah. I have a responsibility to make sure every single member of the tribe, every single member of the Jewish people fulfill every single mitzvah. We have a responsibility towards one another. We need to take care of one another. And in the fulfillment of mitzvos, that is a holy obligation that we have to make sure that our fellow brethren, our brothers and sisters in Am Yisrael, everyone fulfills their mitzvah. Afal pisha yatsa motzi. I could help someone else fulfill their obligation because I'm an arev. I am a guarantor to make sure that everyone fulfills their mitzvah, being that I'm a member of the Jewish people. So if that's the case, so then the chazan, even though he's already fulfilled his obligation of, let's say, davening musaf, he can help others fulfill their obligation. Says the Shulchan Aruch the following. The Shulchan Aruch writes in Siman Kuf Chaf Dalid. The Shulchan Aruch says, Shliach Tzibor shenichnas lebeis hakneses. Someone, a chazan shows up to shul. Umatza tzibor shehispalu balachash, and sees the congregation davening quietly. V'hu tzarech la'amod lifnei hateva, and he is there to go lead the congregation in the repetition. La'alter yored lifnei hateva. Right away, he can get up and go daven u'mispal b'kol l'tzibor, and go daven on behalf of the congregation. Ve'ein tzarech lachzor l'spal b'lachash. He doesn't need to daven again himself. He already davened once. He can still fulfill the obligation for everyone else to hear the repetition. Says the Mishnah Berurah that it's, of course, better to use a chazan that hasn't davened yet already. De'ein bahem echad sheyachol lehispalol. It's in a scenario where there's no one else who knows how to do it, which on Rosh Hashanah is a common scenario where there's only a few people that actually know how to daven for the Amud on Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, one would be able to, even if they've already davened the Musaf or they've already even davened Shachris, it would be okay for them to be able to do the repetition on behalf of everyone else. Now, Shachris is a little more tricky. The Bir Halacha, the Chavetz Chaim points out, Shachris is a little more tricky because there's a halacha of Samach Geula L'Tfila, that one needs to be able to connect Birchos Kriya Shema, the blessings of the Shema, to Shmona Esrei. So being the fact that he already said the blessings of the Shema when he davened earlier in the day, he can't do that again. So Shachar is a little more tricky, but definitely for Musaf, it is not an issue to have the same Chazan daven again to help everyone fulfill their obligation of davening for the tzibor. Now, Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav Schechter's Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik was the Rav in Boston. He arrived in Boston in 1932. He was known as the chief rabbi of Boston. And then when Rav Soloveitchik's father passed away, Rav Soloveitchik's father, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, was a Rosh Yeshiva in YU. So the Rav would commute 3 times a week down to YU and give shir in YU. And he did that for so many years. There were close to 2,000 rabbis that got their smicha under Rabbi Soloveitchik's tutelage. He was one of the Gedolei Ador, and he was Rav Schechter's Rebbe. So Rabbi Soloveitchik took this a step further, based on a comment from the Shiltei Giborim and a comment from the Rambam Maimonides that say that, the repetition that the Chazan does of the Shmona Esrei was instituted to help out those that may not know the Shmona Esrei. It's not like today where everyone has an art scroll or even a transliterated art scroll or a transliterated art scroll where, we have these, English translation or, everyone has a Hebrew book in front of them that they're able to daven. If you know how to read, you could daven. If you know how to read English even, you could daven. It's much more accessible today, the ability to daven, even for the most removed person. It's relatively accessible. However, that wasn't the case, back in the times of the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, when davening was established, when the Shmona Esrei was established. The Gemara tells stories about people that, they'd be in the middle of davening for the tzibor, and then they themselves would forget because they were davening all by memory. So, and which, by the way, attributes a lot to the fact that we have different minhagim. Sephardim daven Shmona Esrei with a few slight changes, and Hasidim and Ashkenazim, everyone has slight different customs of their Shmona Esrei because it was originally done in that kind of way. There were a few manuscripts of it being written down, but a lot of it was being done by memory, and therefore customs would build, etc. Fine. So the original enactment to have this repetition that the Chazan does was established because people didn't necessarily know, not everyone knew, and therefore this is an opportunity for them. They would say word for word with the Chazan, the Shmona Esrei. But the way that the Rambam brings down this halacha and the way that the Shiltei Giborim brings down this halacha is that once it was established that there is a repetition of the Shmona Esrei, therefore, it's taken on the status of a tfilas hatzibor, that this is actually the prayer of the congregation, that the congregation is praying right now. It's not simply, as Rabbi Soloveitchik said, that I'm fulfilling my obligation through the Chazan saying the repetition, but I'm fulfilling an obligation of the communal prayer when the Chazan says his repetition. The Shiltei Giborim connects this to the just like how there were individual sacrifices that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash, there were also communal sacrifices that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore this is no different. And based on that, then certainly you can have a Chazan help others fulfill their obligation of this communal prayer, even if he himself has already davened or even has already led a repetition for another minyan. He can come to the second minyan and do the same on behalf of everyone else.
Rabbi, if the same Chazan is doing, say, Musaf twice, when he does it the second time, would he not do the individual one because he's already did the individual
Correct.
the first group, so he would just do the repetition?
You would just do the repetition. Correct.
Okay.
That's exactly right. I want to just point out, we try always to show that, again, we're looking at the halacha happening in real time. These are questions that our generation has not dealt with, or at least dealt with on a much more minimal level. We are now dealing with these things on a day-to-day basis. We're preparing for a Yom Tov in a very, very unique way. And now tonight, we've gone through all of these questions that are related to Yom Tov, and I'm sure that there are going to be more that come up that maybe we'll dedicate more classes to. But it's an incredible thing. I personally find it to be quite inspirational and motivational when I learn this real-time Torah, when we see when the Torah Chaim, the living Torah, and that we are going to be experiencing it on Rosh Hashanah. I find it to be such an inspirational thing that charges me to learn more. I wanted to show you though that so Rav Shechter has for the shilas that he's been getting that really apply to many people. What he's been doing is he's been publishing his opinions and sending them around. So this is, like the 50th one he's already written up and sent around. And this is written by Rav Shechter. He writes it, and he has someone type it up for him. And he wrote this when he was in the mountains. Every summer, Rabbi Soloveitchik goes to the mountains for the summer for about 3 or 4 weeks. He goes to Tannersville, New York, and he basically sits and just learns up in the mountains the entire time that he's there. But he doesn't have access to the regular svarim that he normally has when he's in New York in the Beis Medrash, and really his learning, he has a Gemara with him, he has a Rambam, a Shulchan Aruch, but everything else it's all by memory, and he's still writing these responsa while he's up in the mountains. And all of these sources while he was in the mountains without the svarim, and he even writes, he says, basically in an apologetic way, he writes, "Vani ke'es baharim." I'm right now in the mountains. The ein iti kol kach svarim. I don't have so many books with me. Basically, in an apologetic way, I'm sorry that I am not giving you enough of a robust answer. I don't have all my svarim with me. It's just unbelievable when we are able, it builds confidence when you know that someone of this level is the one that's positing Shaila, someone with tremendous Yiras Shamayim, someone who's a Talmid Chacham, someone who is really an embodiment of the Tzelem Elokim. The fact that we're created in the image of God is, I think, a beautiful, beautiful thing. I wanted to share one story before we go. We mentioned this idea from Rabbi Soloveitchik, and Rabbi Soloveitchik arrived to the United States. Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik arrived to the United States in 1932. He was a young man at the time. He was born in 1903. So he was a very, very young man at the time when he arrived to the United States. And upon his arrival, in Europe, he already gained fame of being a tremendous Talmid Chacham. Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grodzinski knew his uncle, the Brisker Rav, knew. Everyone knew of the Rav, of Rabbi Soloveitchik. And upon his arrival in 1932, his father, who was teaching in Yeshiva University at the time, Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, actually took all of his students in Yeshiva University to the docks to meet and greet the Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and because he told his students, the Gadol Hador is coming to the United States, we have to go greet him properly. And he took his entire class from Yeshiva University to go greet the Rav. The next morning after the Rav arrived, he gave class on exactly this topic. He gave class on this topic of the concept of a communal prayer. And that was the first class that he taught in Yeshiva University, and we just brought it to La Jolla via Zoom as just an unbelievable thing. Again, Torah's Chaim is it's just unbelievable. All right, we will stop here for now. Of course, I can hang out if anyone has any questions. Happy to stick around for a couple minutes.